All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this book. Who is author of No Woman Left Behind. She is also the founding CEO of the Fistula Foundation, a global nonprofit dedicating to treating childbirth injuries. I'm Amanda Marchung, and I'm the executive director for the Stanford Center for Innovation and Global Health. So we are going to begin first with a reading from Kate, a selection from her book, but not quite yet. I still have to introduce you. Okay. And then this will be followed by a conversation with our center's director, Michele Berry, who is also Stanford's Dean of Global Health. And then we'll end with questions from the audience. So it is my pleasure to introduce Kate. Kate joined the Fistula Foundation as its chief executive in 2005 and has led its expansion from supporting only one hospital in Ethiopia to its current position as the world's leader in fistula treatment. And she is a passionate advocate for maternal health, and she has expanded critical fistula care across 35 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. So it's quite a feat. During her tenure as CEO, the foundation earned consecutive 4-star ratings from Charity Navigator every year since 2006, placing it in the top 1% of nonprofit organizations. And I know too, having worked for a nonprofit, that is a very difficult achievement. It has also consistently earned an A rating from Charity Watch and has been named one of the top 50 charities in the by Consumer Reports. So before joining the foundation, Kate served as on the House Foreign Affairs Committee staff and as special assistant and deputy chief of staff at the U.S. Agency for International Development. She also consulted to USAID's mission in Tanzania, the Rockefeller Foundation, the International AIDS Vaccine Network, the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative, and the Women's Funding Network. Previously, she was an advertising executive at 2 leading agencies. She graduated from the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley, and she earned her MPA from Princeton University and was named the American Marketing Association's Nonprofit Marketer of the Year. So I, for one, I've already shared with Kate, we share 2 alma maters, and having read her book, I'm kind of kicking myself that I never took classes at the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. She is, your passion and your persistence really comes across in the book. And I really appreciate also your honesty and your facility. So your new book, our new book, No Woman Left Behind, is a deeply personal account of the journey to bring healing to women suffering in silence. So Kate, thank you so much for joining us. And we would love for you to begin by reading a passage from your book.
Okay, I will. First, I'm sorry that bio was so long and that my late parents weren't here to hear it because it's a little bit extensive. But before I started reading from the book, I just wanted to get a show of hands of how many of you had heard of fistula before you saw and noticed about this talk. Okay. Well, smarter than the average bears, read the New York Times frequently. Okay. In a lot of rooms where I've given talks, a couple of meek hands will go up and people will not heard of it. So so some of this then will be old news to you when I read a little bit of the prologue from the book. I was really honored that the foreword was written by Abraham Verghese, who some of you know. I know Michele had asked him to come today, but
he sent he's on a plane.
Oh, okay. In any case, so what I'm going to do is just read you a short passage of the first time I met a fistula patient. This was 1994. I was just a newly printed MPA from the Woodrow Wilson School, or was called the Woodrow School at the time. It's since been renamed. And I show up at this hospital in the capital of Addis Ababa. And I thought I knew a lot. You go to an elite school and they make you think you know a lot. And I had studied a lot of reproductive health issues and thought even of doing a PhD in the population research area. But I had never heard of fistula. So in my head, on the way over to this hospital, I'm turning over that word in my head. And it meant nothing to me. Now, if you say this in front of a doctor like Michele, they'll laugh because it's a pretty basic medical term, but it wasn't a term I was familiar with. And I thought, gosh, the Ethiopians were well occupied by the Italians in the 30s. Maybe it's a proper name. There's some guy like Mario Fistula or somebody that endowed this hospital. Now, doctors laugh at that because it shows just what ignorance I had walking into this place. But I hear about this issue then for the first time, and I am brought over by the head of the hospital, who's the founder, Dr. Hamlin, to meet a fistula patient. So with that in mind, I'll just give you just my first meeting of a fistula patient. And there's a woman named Mamitu who worked directly with Dr. Hamlin, who's the translator, because Dr. Hamlin was Australian and didn't learn Amharic. So here we go. Dr. Hamlin says, "This is Hannah. Mamitu, can you ask Hannah to tell us what happened to her?" Mamitu turned to Hannah and asked her a question in Amharic. I waited for the translation, which took a while because Hannah had a lot to say. She married a young man from her village when she was 17 and soon became pregnant. But after 5 days of labor at home, she delivered a stillborn baby boy. She awoke to find herself in a urine-soaked bed. She hoped it would go away, so she stayed in bed as much as she could, but it wouldn't stop. Her husband hated her smell and built a separate small hut for her to live in. It was lonely. That was about 5 years ago. But when her mother heard that there was a hospital in Addis to help her, she sold a goat to pay for the bus fare. It took several different buses to finally reach Addis. Mitu then asked Hannah another question, and a smile radiated across her face. While I didn't understand Amharic, it was clear something good had finally happened to Hannah. Mamitu explained. She said arriving at the hospital and seeing other women with her problem made her feel less alone and less sad. Dr. Hamlin added, "We were able to close her fistula yesterday. It was an easy operation and she should be able to go home in 2 weeks when she's healed." So I end this chapter, and I won't go through all of it, but I'll read just a page or a paragraph, rather, the last page, just to kind of center this specific patient story on sort of a broader health trend that people that work on maternal health understand, but those of you who don't, you're maybe not aware of. The day a woman gives birth is the day she is most likely to die or be grievously injured. The difference in health outcomes between rich and poor in our world is in the odds of death due to pregnancy or childbirth. As Justin Trudeau proclaimed, poverty is sexist. For a woman in sub-Saharan Africa, that lifetime risk is 1 in 41. For an American woman, it is 1 in 2,700. And for a woman in the EU, it is 1 in 11,500. For every woman who dies, an estimated 20 are injured, some seriously. We tell ourselves that all lives have equal value, but this data reveals a very different story. So that's the beginning. And I could read more, but I think I'd probably bore you to tears. So I'm going to stop and let Michele ask me some questions. But this issue has captured my heart for a very long time, for 20 years. And that's because the surgery that Hannah got really does transform her life. And I know that sounds gratuitous. How many women in the room have been told that a new face cream is going to transform your life, or a smoothie, or yet a kale or something? But with this surgery, it really does do that. Because as the story of Hannah highlighted, it's not just the physical injury. It's the fact that that injury then makes this woman often, in the words of Nick Kristof, a modern day leper, where she's outcast. You think about incontinence. Nobody would want to be incontinent, but there are people probably in our own lives that are incontinent, that are buying adult diapers at Costco or Walgreens or whatever. There's ways to manage incontinence. We all have hot and cold running water to shower. Most of us have more clothes than we'll ever wear until we head off to, the Goodwill or someplace once a year with a bag full of guilty clothes that we don't wear. If you're a poor woman with a dirt floored hut, that's not the same thing. The dirt floored hut is a very unforgiving surface for urine or feces. And if you don't have hot and running water, which you don't, even just bathing yourself is obviously just a challenge. So the thing with the surgery, it does really give this woman back her life. That's our tagline, help give a woman new life, which again, sounds like hyperbole, but it really isn't. There are very few things in global health where you can have a one-time interjection of a service that transforms somebody's life so dramatically. And that's what's, gotten me in it and kept me in it. Because if you think about sometime in your own life where you've been decimated by something, the loss of something, in this case, it's the loss of your well-being, your health, the loss of somebody you love. What gets you through those periods of time? The love of people around you, right? It's not really the through line. And so for these women, they get the opposite of that. They get demonization when they need support and empathy. So that's what got me in it. That's what's kept me in it. And basically that's why I wrote the book. So on to Michele.
So I have to just tell you one little personal anecdote. This is the second time only that I've met Kate Grant in person. I met her the first time at Sarah Anderson's and Malcolm's house at a dinner, and I found her so mesmerizing and inspiring that when I heard she was writing this book and memoir, I said, we need to get you. We need to get you here to launch your book for people to hear about it.
And I
'Cause
think you're
I was
sabbatical, aren't you?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
But I just have to say that. And then I know that most people raise their hand about fistula, but I wondered if you could just define a little bit. It's quite clear that it's obstructed birth.
Yeah.
But I think what maybe some folks don't know is that very violent rape during conflict
It's
is another
true.
way. And if you could just describe
Sure,
a little
sure.
bit about why you get the incontinence and just so that
Yeah.
people
No, I'd
know.
be happy to do that. Fistula is, and you're the doctor, so I'm treading on, I'm the one.
No,
with
that's-
the-
yeah.
Anyway, is a hole between, that's the clinical definition, a hole between an internal organ and the outside world that shouldn't exist. So strictly speaking, we should be the Obstetric Fistula Foundation, but boy, is that a long URL. So we're just the Fistula Foundation, and there's honestly not a lot of competition for other kinds of fistula. So the obstetric type is produced by a prolonged obstructed labor. Why haven't you heard about it in this country? Because women don't get it in this country, because you get a C-section, partly for liability reasons. I had a C-section, 24 hours in there, they're trying to get you to a C-section so nobody gets sued if something goes south, but you'll get a C-section. Now, with the current administration in Washington, I'm not sure this is the case, but it used to be the case. You could show up undocumented to a hospital in this country and in obstructed labor, and you would get a C-section. Now, somebody might hound you till the day you die for what it costs, but you will get the C-section. And that's not, and that will preserve your life and the life of your baby. The same is not true in places where women are giving birth at home. So the woman will stay in obstructed labor that's not relieved by a C-section. And just as a sort of an interesting reference point, in Manhattan, where the Waldorf Astoria sits, in the 1890s, there was a fistula hospital that closed. So women here used to get this problem because they weren't, most of the babies were delivered at home, and we didn't have hospital-based deliveries. But back to obstetric fistula. So the woman will stay in labor, often for days, without an epidural. And so what changes that situation? Now, this is graphic and sad, but it's also true. The baby dies usually 24 hours, 36 hours in utero, and the fontanelle gradually collapses. So the head basically gets smaller because the baby's dead. And that's what allows her to finally pass a stillborn baby. So that's obstetric fistula. And the holes, it's really a trauma injury. There's a joke with fistula surgeons. You've seen one fistula, you've seen one fistula. This isn't like, for instance, say a cleft palate that's a congenital, issue, and you've seen one cleft palate, you've seen probably all cleft palates. This is not like that at all. This is a trauma injury. So some women will have small holes near the vaginal opening. Those are the easiest ones to fix. Others will have larger holes near the cervix, scar tissue, much harder to fix. Others will have collateral damage sometimes to urethras, and that's where it gets dicey, and you can end up with a woman that's not able to be cured. I've met patients that have had a bladder slipped away because the baby's head pressing so long. What it does is it cuts off oxygenated blood. So those holes, people tend to think, because we've had friends that have had that second or third baby that comes faster, big head, and you end up with an episiotomy that's huge, a huge rip tear. This is not a rip tear. This is necrotic tissue. It's necrotic because it didn't get oxygenated blood because the baby's head was pressing. So that's what produces that. The more common injury is to the vagina, but you can also have holes in the rectum, which means you basically have diarrhea out your vagina. That's just as brutal as it gets, but you in essence have urine and feces mixing and entering also through vagina. And that, again, to be specific, one of the other things that make this such a tough issue is if you're incontinent here, usually you're incontinent through the, the orifice it was supposed to come out of. You're not leaking waste out of your vagina, and that's a birth canal, but it's also a sex canal. And that's a tough place to have holes with, leaking waste. So, and to Michelle's question about traumatic fistula, which is, it can be to the same body parts, but it's caused by basically rape, sometimes rape with weapons, with a young girl, rape with a male erect penis and a girl that's not anatomically ready to take that, can cause holes. That though is one that gets understandably people very uncomfortable, outraged, all those things that are understandable. The good news is that's not the majority of, even Denny Mukwege, who many of you may know of. Dr. Denny Mukwege, who founded the Panzi Hospital in Congo, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018, our longest term partner. Even at his hospital, the vast majority of fistulas they treat are not the traumatic version. They're the obstetric variety. Now, they're still related to conflict because you have girls that have been raped that get pregnant and delivered too soon, or because of conflict, they're afraid to come into a facility even when a labor is obstructed. So fistula is related to the conflict, but most of the fistulas are not traumatic with its, a bayonet, a erect penis in a 5-year-old or whatever it is. There are some and they're horrible, but they're not the majority at all.
Now, this woman is not a doctor, okay? That was a very thorough explanation, probably better than the explanation I could have given as a physician. And what I wanted to ask you is, you started your life out as a absolutely kill 'em marketer on Wall Street. And can you share how you changed your focus, or why you changed your focus to become this unbelievable knowledgeable person?
Yeah, there's probably two pieces of that. One is the environment I grew up in. I grew up not very far from here. My dad was a NASA scientist, but I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. And this was not a time, at least the 70s anyway. I was a kid in the 60s, but coming of age in the 70s, early 80s. This was not a time where I knew people that were aspiring to go into the Pete School. We just come out of, Watergate, Vietnam, Carter's presidency. This was not, Carter went on to do many wonderful things, but I think his presidency was not his presidency was not one. It was a stillborn president. No, I shouldn't say that. I mean, an amazing man in terms of what he did after he left the White House. But so I didn't know people that were going into save the world. I was part of the greed is good 80s. And so I went to Madison Avenue. I went to undergrad at Berkeley, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was raised middle class. I mean, like I said earlier, my dad was a scientist, but there were 4 of us in 6 years. So there was enough, but we weren't getting on planes and going to Europe. Money meant something to me. What it meant was independence. It meant being able to make my own decisions. That was very important to me when I was coming out of undergrad. I was raised with enough, but not too much, and I wanted more. And but then, somewhere along that way, you realize that, at least for me, more stuff didn't make me happy. I mean, it just was. I mean, I've got a car, that's enough. I don't need a better car. Do you know what I mean? I have an apartment. I don't need a better apartment. Sort of this idea of getting better. That wasn't very motivating. And I'd say some of my parents' values, or my mother was a teacher, embedded in that someplace. But the key thing that sort of just blew my mind was I took a trip around the world for 7 months, sort of a midlife crisis. I'd worked every summer to help pay for college. I hadn't done the study abroad thing. I hadn't gone to study, Europe. No, I had to have money to pay for school. So I felt like I'd missed a chapter. So I went and took a trip, but I did 7 months. So I'm going to do it and do it right. Went around the world, put all my stuff in storage. Now, I wasn't going, by the way. This was not like save the world. This was cute. Girls just want to have fun. I went with a friend, and, we spent the first 3 months in Europe and partying with men. No, I mean, we just had a great time. And then we got to India, in the last 3+ months of, India, what was then Burma is now Myanmar, and Indonesia. And we were traveling on a budget. It was like I made millions working in advertising. So we were living with people that were average people. So we didn't have hot or cold running water. We were often using, basic, a hole in the, hole in the floor, or whatever it was. And you get a sense living day in and day out that these things that I took for granted my whole life, I mean, really, safe, good public California schools, even a college that I went to at that point, Berkeley was free, all this stuff I took for granted. Hot and cold running water, plenty of whatever you needed, food, clothes, etc. And then you live day in and day out with people that are struggling every day to just get those basic needs met. And so I came back to my advertising life and like, God, all this stuff I learned at Berkeley, my ability to sort of look at numbers and look at data. And I'm using that to basically convince people they should have an emotional attachment to one brand of like toilet paper versus another. I mean, the dark arts of advertising is mostly about making you feel bad about buying one thing or make you feel good about buying something else. Rarely is there a huge discernible impact between product A and product B. And when you really get your hand around that, I was working on Levi Strauss business at the time where the lights really went on. I mean, one of the things, and that was a really great company, still is. They extraordinarily progressive on same-sex marriages, and a friend that there's a terrific company, their own foundation, and et cetera. But I'm sitting in this meeting, and there's kind of stupid that I just lost the plot a long time ago. I never got the memo. They're trying to sell different kinds of jeans and make you feel bad about last year's jeans. And I was like, but I like my 501s that I've had forever. That's why I like them. But the idea was, let's convince somebody that last year's isn't good. They need this year's. And you finally, I mean, without going through it farther. So the trip combined with a kind of a soulless career, it was fun though. I would say I had fun in advertising. It was fun. I mean, it's a pretty ruthless business. It doesn't, process doesn't matter. Are you selling stuff? Are the ads working? And that part was kind of fun, working with creative people. But then you back up and realize what, the end goal of what you're doing. And like, oh my God, we need to do something else.
I hear you. It makes for a fascinating read. Let me bring you back to what's happening currently with USAIG.
Okay.
And what DOGE has done to USAIG. You saw all these wonderful projects. You talk about them while you were overseas.
Yeah.
Can you share with us your feelings about what this dismantling? I mean, we're all very upset about, but your foundation has had first eyes on this.
I worked at the USAID mission when I was a graduate student in Tanzania, and I also worked as a political appointee as a deputy chief of staff. They're in over my head, really, but you see Princeton, they give you a job you probably are not quite qualified for. But in the first Clinton administration, you feel like you're sort of halfway faking it all the time, but working hard and learning a lot. But so I did have a exposure to USAID, both at the field, programmatically and politically, 3.5 years of it. Plus that job I was at on the Hill, which had oversight for AID. So I just had that kind of window. So with that in mind, I guess Fistula Foundation, just for starters, we don't take government money. And so the closure of USAID hasn't impacted us at all. And I'm not sort of some libertarian that's just against government funding at all. Like I said earlier, I undergraduate education for free based on the government. So why didn't we take government funding? Because of the processes to try to get it we're just a bridge too far. I would have had to hire a bunch of people to sort of do this labor intensive, inefficient contracting. It just wasn't worth it. So to your question, I have like sort of cognitive dissonance that's extraordinarily powerful in my own mixed up mind. Anyway, about what DOGE has done. On the one hand, reckless, stupid, innocent people dying, evil almost. I hold that thought. I hold that thought. It's a quote Bill Maher. Anybody can sort of destroy something. And what he said was destroying aid the way they did it was in essence like if you did a remodel on your house. Wouldn't you take the valuables out first? Wouldn't you take your personal possessions out? Would you actually level the whole thing, or would you maybe keep parts of it? But this was, any fool can destroy something. That's easy. An arsonist with a couple matches and some gasoline can destroy something. So there's that evil, horrible, unconscionable, etc. So the opposing thought that I thought about writing something about it, like an op-ed, and then I decided I didn't want this opposing thought to be used to fuel what I think is really unconscionable. But so here's the opposing thought. It's that I think USAID was a mess, and not a little bit of mess, not what you hear like, well, there was a little bit of waste and we should just reform. No, I don't think so. I really think it needed pretty close to a teardown. Not the way it was done, but pretty at all. So I don't respect the way they did it, but part of me having been in political Washington for 3.5 years, is the reason, in addition to not having empathy and I think an understanding of the power of soft power, I think if they'd done it more gradually, nothing would have changed, because what you'd have are the people that had vested interest in a system that benefited, I think, primarily the people that worked in the system, not the poor. And you can see that even in USAID's numbers, where they say only 10% of the money actually gets to local organizations. So I think it needed a major overhaul. What they did, again, unconscionable, but when you start, without getting into too much of the details, but another name brand university where you can look at their tax return. Okay, I'll say it, it's Johns Hopkins. But they get 80% of their money from the US government, almost $400 million a year. Out of that, they spent $69 million on travel. Let's start there. How many people do you think poor were being helped on plane flights from Baltimore to sub-Saharan Africa? I would say 0. We spend less than 1% of our money on travel, and we find hospitals doing high-end surgery. So this idea that you have to spend all this money with people flying back and forth is just insane. Their CEO in Baltimore, where you can buy a house for $300,000, I looked it up, the cost of living is nothing compared to like here or even DC, $1.3 million. Everybody on that tax return makes more than the head of USAID. Now, there's others. I mean, you just look into it. Such a small amount of that money is actually going to indigenous organizations like our organization. I mean, we have a little bit of our program expenses paying some of our own staff, but well over 75% of the money gets to the hospitals. And I don't mean we say it's a program expense and it's actually paying part of my salary. I mean, it's going to a hospital. It's ending up in a doctor's pocket or a nurse's pocket, or they're providing meals for women. So it's just, I really think it needed a major overhaul. The big problem though, and the sort of third point of this is, I don't think that there's any evidence, and I read the Wall Street Journal, I read the New York Times, there's any evidence that the existing administration understands the importance of development from a soft power perspective. So there's been nothing I have seen which says, let us rethink this. Let's figure out where US interests, lie, and let's figure out how do we create a tool that will meet sort of the moment. I would say that moment is mostly China from a realpolitik perspective, but there's not much in there that I've seen that they're even working on that.
So let me push you a little bit further
Please.
on that. The concept of soft power. So I've actually written a little bit in the area of vaccines.
Yeah.
Being used as a way of soft power,
Right.
getting the COVID vaccine to Africa or other vaccines. So tell us a little bit about how your foundation actually delivers soft power.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, we're pretty apolitical. So if I were running the U.S. Agency for Foreign, for Foreign Development or Foreign Aid or whatever it's called, whatever they would call it, because it obviously wouldn't be named USAID, that would be a different thing. We are pretty much a humanitarian organization. I mean, yes, we're American, and most of our donors are American. We have donors in 70 countries, so it isn't just American. I would say, so we're not, we're a humanitarian organization, not so much a political organization. But I do think, I mean, if I had a, elevator, I was thought about writing an op-ed this way, which was, you want to win the Nobel Prize, Donald, forget about Gaza and Ukraine and get a team of experts together to have you think about, really good people think about foreign aid and pull in, have Bill Gates chair it. I mean, that guy knows more about, I would say, health spending at scale than almost anybody in the world. But I don't think there's a stomach for that, because it doesn't align with America first. So that's.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the Gates Foundation, what you were talking about, is now shifting all of their offices in Africa, not having that flights that go back and forth from Seattle.
Well, we did a couple years ago, we got a big, if anybody read the book, we got a large gift from Mackenzie Scott. And what we did at the time was.
Which was transformational for you, right?
It was, well, I wouldn't say, it helped.
It was really.
It gave us even more momentum. Right. But for what it's worth, we spent that money down in less than 2 years. And which is a very powerful proof point that we've always said there are a lot more women, and if you just give us money, we can treat more of them. But now we've really got the receipts. Somebody gives you that kind of money. I mean, our original budget was, at the time was about $15 million. So to be able to spend basically a year's worth of money in less than 2 years that you weren't counting on, says there is a need. And we just got a large gift from, not gift, because we had to go through the hoops, but Bloomberg. And I think that one of the things that was compelling to him was we could produce results at scale quickly. Yeah.
So how do you get access to all these folks?
Access to who?
All these, well, you have many names in this book. And you've had Oprah and Christoph, help you. I'm just curious as to how do you navigate the donor philanthropy scene?
I'm a stalker. That's really it. I try to.
We try to stalk.
It's
We're not as successful.
Yeah, it's one of the harder things because sometimes we get lucky. And we nurture relationships. We really try hard to nurture relationships with anybody that, even comes close to us. Like Louis C.K. is a good example. Like I'd heard of Louis C.K., but he was so mad at, I know this now, but Ticketmaster, that he self-produced his own show and at the Beacon Theater from Manhattan, and then sold it online. So I don't know what this is going to do. And then he brought in like $1 million, and he gave a chunk of it to his team. He kept some for himself, and then he gave a quarter of it to charities, and we were one of them. But I was like, how did he even know about us? But I know that he gave money to Charity Water. And I when I got to know him a little bit, he said, yeah, they sent me a plaque. No, we were like sending him photo books. We were sending him not love letters, but we were just staying on top of it, making sure that we distinguished ourselves. Because the hardest thing with this issue, and so I'm so grateful for all of you today, just coming to listen, and obviously my friend Michele for doing this, and you guys for, hooking us up, but is it trying to get interest in this issue and trying to sustain it is so hard, because you're going to walk out of here and there's going to be nothing in your day-to-day life that will echo back these women in your life, because we don't have childbirth injuries that disable women. You don't see it. So it isn't like global warming or education where there's things that might remind you of it. It's just nothing that reminds
We're
you
not
of it.
paying attention to those either.
Yeah, okay, good.
From the administration point of view. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
No. So I don't know. It's trying to keep attention. I guess like Peter Singer has become a really good friend of the foundation, a friend of mine, and that started out with, I read something in the New York Times, and I thought, like, I want to meet this guy. So sometimes that goes nowhere. A lot of times it does. You just try to insinuate yourself, but occasionally you find that there's a commonality, and then you try to build that relationship. But that's actually one of the harder things, is trying to get people to pay attention. And then to also, Oprah is amazing, but she was also sort of one and done. We did the same thing with her. We did with Luke. Sent our photo books. I knew the first name of the staff person, but I think I was still like a couple circles away removed from her. She has people that I think keep people like me away from her. So she did a show, and then somebody in the back, maybe you had a job being one of those people, who knows, or you were one of those anyway. But that's also hard. So I try to not take it personally, because most of the time, even promoting this book, honestly, it's done well. I had some really terrific people helping me edit it. Abraham was so kind to write the foreword. It's got some modest awards, but even just trying to get attention, even when it's good. Again, I had help, not just me, but it's just so hard to get attention. It is hardest thing.
So let me ask you a personal question.
Okay.
You were a single mom.
Yes.
Single mom for quite a long time.
It's true. Well, I still am, but
obviously
he's an adult, but
no, I shouldn't say obviously.
no, that's true.
But,
That's right.
So what was it like? You were a single mom when this was just starting to take off.
Well,
Can
he
you
was
talk a little bit about the balance of your
a couple
or
things.
integration of your
He was my son was not quite 6 when I took over the foundation. So I don't think I could have taken it. And not to anybody that's got a toddler and you're out like running General Motors or something, great. I couldn't have done that. I had to make some trade-offs when he was younger, and I still had jobs. I wasn't like I just could sit home. I was married when he was born, and I went through a divorce when he was 4 years old. Anyway, so how do you do both? I would say, at least for me, it was getting really specific about where I'd put my time, because Jeff Bezos doesn't get more hours in the day than I do. I mean, you guys have the same number of minutes. I mean, and so where do you put it? And I guess for me, I just made decisions about putting things, I really wanted to be a very present parent for him. But I did things like anything I could pay somebody else to do, even when I had like no money, it was buying clothes off of eBay. I had somebody clean my house. I had somebody do the mow and blow my yard. I mean, time became the thing I put the most premium on, like time with him, time with work, and anything I could buy my way out of somebody else doing, I did. That, I mean, just sort of tactically. And then you have to make at least for me, I had to make some choices, which was there just are only so many hours. And so like pursuing romantic relationships, yes, I dated a few people here and there, but like that would have been bringing somebody in, this gets really personal, but bringing somebody in who's not your child's, parent. They're never going to have, I mean, unless it's really little or really unique, they're not going to have the same relationship. And it's almost like a stool, one of the legs isn't right or something. It just wasn't, it didn't work, or it didn't work for me. And also I really love my work. I really over time just got to get so much satisfaction out of it. And relationships had a lower ROI for me. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but.
So I have a quote
Okay.
that you, from the book, that I'd like you
held to
to
account for something I said.
expand upon. When you assume that you create the problem rather than someone else, you give yourself the power to fix it. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh yeah. I feel like I can have that tattooed on my arm, mostly so I don't ever forget it. Yeah, I think a younger me, and maybe I might be still this way about some things, a problem comes up in your life and it's a natural defense mechanism. It's you. I mean, it's either a person or a situation, you know what I mean? It's sort of not me. It's that this employer or this work thing's bad, or this person's bad, or this, somehow I'm attributing it to somebody else. And I mean, sometimes that happens. You have something bad happens to you. This moron that was on their phone, like total car wrecked my neck. Like that was, I didn't do anything to deserve that. I'm just being in the wrong place. So there are some of those things. But I'd say most of the time, if I said like, I created this, what's it supposed to teach me? And I'm going to learn something from that. Like I brought this person in my life. I brought this person onto our team rather than being like, oh, you're bad. You're this. What did I do wrong here? Where did I miss? Like if I were to sit in this situation again, would I hire this person again? If the answer is no, what did I not see when I hired them? I'm in a relationship where it's not working. What isn't working? Like that I've learned about myself. I mean, it's just, because I too often hear, and probably my younger self was this way, this kind of almost a victim thing. And if you become a victim, and sometimes you are, like this moron that ran into me, I was a victim of a totaled her car. I mean, I was a victim of that person. But most of the time, at least in my experience, that isn't the case. And if I say, I created this, or what's the universe trying to teach me? I'm not a victim anymore. I'm a learner. I'm trying to learn something.
Let's go back to your younger self.
Okay.
What would you tell your younger self now after having this really wonderful career?
So how young are we going? I'm old, so there's a lot of younger years here, but
when you're starting off in your career?
Starting off my career. Like in advertising. Oh my gosh, I was so lost looking back on it. I was so kind of driven. I see some undergrads now that I've, and I think I was sort of like you maybe. I mean, I was just chasing another brass ring kind of, and got into a training program, and everybody had come from these sort of Amherst and Williams, they were having, and MBAs from Harvard, where I know your daughter is. I was just lost, I think, in terms of my own values. So what would I say? Mostly I'd say like you evolve. We all do. With more experiences we have, we evolve. Hopefully we evolve. We change. Our perspective grows and broadens. And so I probably would just say, yeah, lean into that. Whether it's travel or new opportunities, new experiences.
Well, I'm going to sort of ask my last question and then open it up because I think it's always important to have dialogue. But my last question. It's not something we discuss because I just met your successor.
Okay.
And she's sitting in the room. Maybe you want to introduce.
This is Pam Lonnie. She has been my chief operating officer for the last almost 3 years since my deputy of 18 years stepped down.
So what would you tell her? What do you think the most important thing she should know as she goes forward?
Oh, well, I think I've already said this to her, which is don't be afraid. The work will teach you. Because the foundation, and this is something, I know your daughter's at Harvard Business School, and I was lucky enough to go to a course they had there. I think she'll have strategic perspectives in nonprofit management. And I mean, one of the things they said is that nonprofits, the energy to grow is almost entirely internally placed. You don't have external competition generally. So the foundation could stall without pushing forward. Occasionally you get an opportunity where you just run and chase it, but you sort of have to create your own magic. And sometimes that can be scary. But if you take some measured steps, even if you make a mistake, as long as we wouldn't make a reputational mistake, anything that would be ethically flawed that could, but some marketing misstep, you're going to learn from it. Just the work will teach you. The work will teach you. That's probably what I would say.
And I'm going to take one last.
Okay, last question. Okay.
Because I see Desiree LeBeau sitting in the room, and she's just written a book herself on collaborative partnerships.
Okay.
And so how, you are this amazing foundation that comes in with a lot of money to very rural, at least it sounded to me, if you're going into Chad and into the Congo, into rural settings. How do you build up equitable relationships and collaborative relationships?
That's a really good question. I would say we've tried really hard to do that from the beginning. In some ways, I wanted to be the anti-USA, not to demean aid, but to come in with very present awareness that money creates inequity from the get-go. So we have money and they want it. That creates an environment where it's easy to see people withholding tough truths, telling what you want to hear. I used to joke when I worked for the Rockefeller Foundation, you go out, my dresses got prettier, my comments were always so insightful, and my jokes were funny. Maybe not any of those things, but you're a walking ATM, or at least you're perceived to be that way. And so I was like, no, I don't want that. I want these partnership is sometimes an overused word, but I wanted to be very clear with, they're going to know more about that community than I ever will, than any of us ever will. They're going to know what's going to work in that hospital. And if they want to, they can also deceive us. That's one of the things with USAID that makes me nuts. I joke sometimes, and maybe you can stick this in the book, spend $8 to make sure 2 isn't, wasted. Now, that's not USAID as an entity. I mean, it is, but it's driven by congressional mandates and probably well-meaning attempts to not have money be wasted. But I guess if you build a trust-based relationship, I'm sure there are some people someplace in our system that are cheating us. If I knew where, we would do away with them. But we start with small grants and we have people earn the trust. But we start with a point of humility that says, this work, your community, and the realization that if somebody wants to lie to you, they can. I mean, we did find one time where somebody had a separate patient, like they literally duplicate records. That occasionally happens. But most of the partners we have, like Denny McQuagge from the first year, are still with us, and they've grown, we've helped them grow. But it's being very aware that we don't know what they do, and money, it shouldn't corrupt that. I mean, where we don't listen because we don't have to. If that makes any sense.
It does. I think it's very hard to change the power dynamic when you come in with money. I think we need to acknowledge that, but it sounds like you've done a very good job for having these long-lasting.
We try. We start, like I was saying, we start usually with small grants for us, like a $50,000 grant. It's not nothing, but it's not a huge amount of money. And we have people report to us, even longer term partners, quarterly. So we're not ever sort of overextending ourselves financially. But even like with the grants, for instance, we've been dutiful about making the grant application be only what we need, and the grant reporting to be lean. We have patient logs for all of the patients, with 110,000 or whatever, but we tried very thoughtfully to not have people jump through hoops for us that we don't need. I mean, one of the things with like these big reports with the acronym lists and I mean, I have the training to write, those things, or at least I used to, but again, how many poor people are getting, it's not peer reviewed research, it's moving the science, it's process, not outcomes.
So let's open it up to questions. Yes, Natalie.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I'm really looking forward to reading your book. I think we share a somewhat similar experience in that I traveled to Ethiopia as a senior college student and went to the Fistula Foundation and met Dr. Hamlin and was really struck
Oh, wow.
by that experience. And I So I work in global nutrition and thinking about malnutrition, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And how do we give children the nutrition they need so that they grow properly? Because I think some of this, right, comes from girls who don't grow properly.
That's right.
And then their pelvises are too small and they have issues with, or they got married really young. In addition, you have this kind of perpetual cycle of girls who give birth too young, and then children who are stunted, et cetera. But I think one of the other things that really struck me when I was visiting there was the women who don't go back. The women who maybe their fistula is fixed, but they are shunned forever from their village and they can't go back. And that there were these homes and almost communities that were created with these women where they grew their food and they had a community together with each other. And I was just wondering if you could speak to some of that and your.
Yeah, that does happen. The strongest data set, I mean, in terms of the biggest N and what we've tracked is in Kenya, where I think we've got 15,000, patient records. And the good news is there 6 months after, and I don't know, it's well over 85%. And I should know the exact number, but I don't. We're basically back to being functioning members of their, community, high measures of well-being. That's not obviously for all women. I mean, one of the things that's striking, and Dr. Hamlin used to say that 90% of the patients were clinically depressed. And I would say, like, well, how did the other 10% escape that? Because if you think about how they've been treated, it's amazing that all of them aren't that way. In fact, the Hamlin Hospital built a small psych ward, maybe, I don't know what year you were there, but to basically deal with women that had psychosis and other things that, I mean, maybe those were, would have happened anyway. There's some psychosis in the population, but, driven to sort of significant mental illness, suicidal ideation and stuff that didn't go away. So it does exist. And we do some work on skills building and that kind of thing, but mostly we don't. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't have utility in some cases. It's just we mostly are pretty focused on where we can do the most good. And the surgery, the ROI on that in terms of well-being is so large. The other thing I would say that we've learned in other places that's a little bit different than the data set out of Ethiopia is that like the average patient age now, I mean, the average age of injury, the patients we have now is roughly 24. So some of the things that you were talking about, definitely if you look back at the Hamlin data from 20 years ago, cut it, not a decade off that, but it was closer to like 16, where there's much more early marriage, which means, early childbearing. Also, you had a huge famine in Ethiopia, as you guys remember, sort of we are the world kind of famine. So lots of malnourishment, which you're exactly right, stunts pelvises, etc. The good news is that we're now seeing, we're not seeing as many, young girls being married off too soon, although we still are seeing a fair amount of fistula. I mean, the thing that's most striking, and if I were younger, I'd be sticking with it longer, is that, we've been in Kenya, like I said, that's the place we've been. We got some corporate money about 11 years ago. And when we originally, it was a competitive process to get this idea of a countrywide network to really end it at scale by, network hospitals together, building a center of excellence for training and then outreach. And I said to the CEO of the company, so we don't have great prevalence data. I wouldn't hang my hat on it. It's some metadata that's pretty weak when you disaggregate it. But I said, I think at some point the curve will drop, and that's a good thing. That means we've worked through the backlog, but we're doing as many surgeries in year 11 as we were doing. It took us a while to build capacity, but in year 2. And Kenya is a middle income developing country. It's not the poorest of the poor. It's not Chad. It's, which to me just says there's a lot of unmet need. And as we saw, as I mentioned a bit ago, about being able to absorb all this money from Scott. So any billionaires in the room? Can we talk? Or even multimillionaires. I'm not picky.
I'm even less picky.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I don't know if you remember me.
Of course I do.
I'm Deb Matitiao. So I'm also very involved in fistula care in Kenya, which is one of the hospitals that you've built and support. And we do post-fistula reintegration. So I'm just always curious, where is Fistula Foundation? Where is your thought on post-fistula care?
Yeah, I guess so in response to this question, and again, when Pam takes over, it might be different, but we again feel like we are somewhat ruthless. I mean, in a way, which is we have kind of blinders on about treatment. In fact, at the beginning, one of the things that I think, and maybe I'm just patting myself on the back or the group of us, is we had to make a decision, what we were going to do on fistula, and there was a lot of interest on the board. I mean, just at least to explore that we would do prevention. I mean, because wouldn't it be better, obviously, to prevent this injury in the beginning? But then you back up and look at it and go, at that point, I don't know what the data are now, but it was over half the births in sub-Saharan Africa are, at home. It's obviously someplace removed from a hospital. You don't have enough doctors. So we thought even about midwifery training, and that could be good in terms of mother and baby outcomes. But fistula prevalence is about 1 in 500. So you'd be doing a lot of good things before you prevented a fistula. And so we made a decision that we were just going to be sort of stick to the knitting, if you will, and do this one thing, and then be able to demonstrate impact. And so we're raising about 10 times as much money yearly as we did when I took over, but we're doing 35 times as many surgeries. And I joke, like a reasonably smart fourth grader, that understands how to read a graph could sort of see, the power of our model, if you will. So we have, I guess, come to peace with not being sort of good things for good people. We're just the Fistula Foundation. We just do this one thing. That said, one of the things I will add is we also do these 3rd and 4th degree tears. So that's become an increasing sort of piece of our portfolio. What those are is basically, you probably are familiar with tears where you get an episiotomy, but these tears produce fecal incontinence, basically where the anal sphincter is blown. So that surgery, though, has a much greater likelihood of success. Why? Because guess what? It's a tear. You sew it back together. I mean, a hole is tougher, particularly in a vagina. The hole is like, there's no more tissue there. You gotta work around a hole. And so we're doing more of those, but you get into the weeds of it. It does produce incontinence, so it's similar, but it's not. It's a tear, not a hole. It's good to see you.
Another question.
Wow, I bored everybody to tears.
No, not at all.
Amanda.
Okay. So Michele and I have been doing some research related to male allies to support the elevation of women into leadership positions in global health. So I was wondering whether you could maybe speak to any kind of role that male allies played in, your elevation to a leadership position, or, but then also I think just this issue, and maybe to play devil's advocate here, it's like, the argument is, oh, well, this is a women's issue. So how do you get men to care about this?
Yeah, that's it's a good question. Well, I'd say first off, about 85% of our donors are women. So, which, we haven't targeted women specifically. And the biggest patron we have is our mutual friend, Nick Kristof, who's written about us and last fall gave us one of his holiday impact prizes. But he's obviously a man. So, but back to the New York Times. The New York Times, obviously, the readership is not 85% female. It's gender balanced, and yet, if the New York Times went to 11 million people, why most of the people responding women? It's somewhat obvious, I guess. That said, our biggest personal donor right now, outside of Mike Bloomberg, is a conservative man. And his wife. And he doesn't do this, it doesn't do anything to do with sort of control on women or celebrating would-be mothers. I think he's a business guy and he likes that we deliver on something, and they've traveled and they live modestly, even though they've got $100 million. I in some ways really respect them, even though our politics are very different. They sort of live their values by giving away money, and they heard about us through, again, another man, Peter Singer. So anybody that wants to help us, I don't care, they can where on the gender spectrum they are, we would want them as our friend. As far as the organization and like me getting the job, I wrote about this a little bit in the book. It was difficult, again, candidly, initially, the board was pretty male dominated, even though it was bigger than it is now. But I shrunk it because it was too much work to keep more going. But anyway, half men, half women, but there was an executive committee that was all men. and all but one older than me. And there was definitely a dynamic that sometimes I did grit my teeth through, you know, that sort of sense that you get treated like you're somebody's daughter kind of. And maybe I was old enough to be at that point, but they were nice people. It wasn't, they weren't bad people. They just weren't like sexist bullies, but there was a dynamic there. It was kind of frustrating sometimes, but overall we just sort of evolved. We shrunk the board. It's more women than men now. And we don't have an executive committee because that ended up being sort of a power center, which that was dysfunctional. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think we honestly have only scratched the surface of this book. It really is a remarkable life journey that I'm really glad you wrote about.